Hey everybody, and welcome back to our 40-second Bible study. We're trying to do a chapter a day, a chapter every day till we're all the way through the Bible. That is our ambition and our goal. And if you want the free PDF handouts that contain all the information that we're going over, there's a link down in the description to our website where you can get them for free. Okay, Genesis chapter 42. Let's try to date the events of this chapter. We know that Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers when he was 17 years old. That'd be approximately 1728 BC. He was 30 years old, 13 years later, when he became a ruler in Egypt. So that would have been 1715 BC. And at this point, 7 years of abundant harvest had passed, just like Pharaoh's dream had predicted in Genesis chapter 41. We've now moved into 7 years of famine. So that means this is at least 20 years after Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt. Now, in terms of our main characters, we have Joseph. He is the son of Jacob and Rachel, and at this point he is the governor. He is the second in command in the nation of Egypt. Joseph's 10 brothers are our next group of characters. They had sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt. We're familiar with that at this point if you've been going through these studies with us. And in Genesis chapter 42, they're going to travel from Canaan to Egypt to buy food because of the famine. Benjamin is Joseph's 11th brother. He's the only other son of Jacob and Rachel, and he's the youngest of all of the children. Now, Jacob is our final character. We are pretty familiar with him at this point. This is Joseph's father, and he is the son of Isaac and the husband of Rachel and Leah. Where did these events take place as we consult our map? Well, Jacob lived in Canaan, and there was a famine in Canaan, so he had to send his sons quite a ways to the southwest, down to Egypt, to buy food and to bring it back. That's what we're going to read about. And we don't know exactly where in Egypt these events took place. We're just told Egypt, not a specific region or city. So now let's tackle our outline. Section number 1, verses 1 through 5, Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy food. So not long after the 7-year famine began, things got a little difficult in Canaan. They were running out of food, and Jacob had heard that there was food in Egypt to be purchased. So he sent his 10 sons down to Egypt. He didn't send his 11th son Benjamin because he was afraid that something might happen to him, and he may have been kind of the favorite at this point. And in verse 6 through 17, Joseph meets his brothers after about 20 years. Funny how fate works out, or how the providence of God works out. So Joseph was, as we mentioned, the governor of Egypt at this point, and all of the people had to come to Joseph in order to buy food. Well, Joseph's brothers appeared to him, and they bowed down to him, showing him respect. And Joseph recognized them, but they didn't recognize Joseph. And after they bowed down to him, Joseph recalled the dreams that he had had that we read about back in Genesis 37. Remember with the sheaves and the stars and the heavens, how they bowed down to Joseph. And he saw his brothers bowing down to him, and he realized that that was prophetic. And this was the fulfillment of that as they came and prostrated themselves before him. This is how God's plan all fit together. Now, Joseph wasn't ready to reveal his identity to them. He wanted, I think, to see if their character had changed, and so he spoke to them roughly, he questioned them quite a bit, and he actually accused them of being spies. They told Joseph that, look, we're not spies, we're just all brothers who came down here to buy food. We have one father, and we have another brother who's back in Canaan. Joseph still wasn't ready to reveal his identity to them, and so he put them in custody for 3 days. In verses 18 through 25, Joseph sends his brothers back to Canaan. So on the 3rd day of their custody, Joseph brought them out, and they appeared before him again. And he told them that they needed to go to the land of Canaan and to bring back their youngest brother. That way they could prove that they were honest men and that they were telling the truth and that they weren't spies. He told them that he was going to keep one of them in custody in Egypt while the other ones were going to get their youngest brother. The brothers, they suspected that these terrible events that were happening to them were happening because they were guilty of that sin that they had committed 20 years ago of selling their brother into slavery. And they said, quote, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." So they didn't know, as they were discussing this, they didn't know that, they didn't know that Joseph could understand their language because he was using an interpreter between them, right? But obviously he spoke the same language that they did because he had grown up with them. So he understood what they were saying. Joseph decided that he was going to imprison Simeon and he was going to let the others go back to Canaan. Before he let them go back, Joseph told his servant to fill their bags, their sacks full of grain. That's what they had come for. But to put the money that they had used to pay for that grain back into their sacks. And then our final section, verses 26 through 38, the journey home and Jacob's response. So on the way home, the brothers opened their sacks and they realized that the money that they had intended to be payment for the grain was still in their sacks. And this made them really nervous. They were kind of already in hot water with the governor, and now it kind of looks like they had stolen the grain and not paid for it. So they went back to their father in Canaan. They told him everything that had happened, and they told him that they could not return to Egypt, and they couldn't get Simeon out of jail until they returned to Egypt with Benjamin. But at this point, Jacob refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt. So Jacob and his household and his sons are in a bit of a dilemma. We'll see a resolution to this in the next couple chapters. Now let's talk about our application before we finish up. Your sins very well might come back to haunt you in the future. So before making a bad decision, something you know you shouldn't do, think about it again. Joseph's brothers immediately assumed that their trouble in Egypt was a consequence of them selling their brother into Egypt 20 years earlier. And you think about it, they must have thought that everything bad that happened to them over that 20-year span was a result of it was payback, it was consequence for their previous sin. Certainly, the short satisfaction that they got from getting revenge on their brother by selling him into slavery wasn't worth the cloud of guilt and anxiety that hung over their heads for the rest of their lives. The decisions that you make today will impact your future peace. You'll never regret making the right decision, no matter how hard it is, but you will definitely regret making the wrong decision, no matter how easy it is.